Well, a very warm welcome to OmniFocus Workflows with Justin DiRose, and I'm really happy to have Justin here today. I've been looking forward to the session for quite some time as well, and look forward to hearing about Justin's workflows, not just with OmniFocus, but with other apps that he uses, as well as pen and paper. And before we get to that, I want to talk a little bit about Learn OmniFocus for those of you who are new. And this membership site has been around since 2014, so we're almost at 6 years now. And started as a bit of an experiment, and I'm happy to report it's going stronger than ever as we get close to our 6-year anniversary. And I have lots of exciting plans for this year. One of the most significant changes that's coming up soon is a brand new website. And this will allow me to bring in new services to Learn OmniFocus and also make it a lot easier to find content as the content library has grown. We've needed a more robust engine for filtering it and easily finding that. So I'm really excited to be unveiling that very soon. And then just to give you a sense of what Learn OmniFocus is all about, even though it's focused on OmniFocus, that's the app that people who come here are using. It's really ultimately about the bigger picture of productivity. How do we live a productive life, and how can OmniFocus and complementary apps help with that? So it's, in a sense, it's not about the technology beyond how can the technology bring that fulfillment and productivity to our lives. There's one of the aspects of Learn OmniFocus is called Learn OmniFocus Live. And there's a few aspects to that. First of all, there's theme sessions. Recently, I did one called Managing Large Projects with OmniFocus 3 as an example. And I'll talk about another session that I'll be leading very soon. Really looking forward to leading that later this month. And we've had many workflow guests on the Learn OmniFocus Live, and I find it's very useful to just see some real world examples of how people are using OmniFocus, and you won't necessarily have exactly the same life or sort of way of approaching this as the people who are on as workflow guests, but I think you'll find you take some inspiration from these and get some ideas, even how they name things or how they organize their projects, things like that. So definitely take what's useful from this and the other sessions. And one thing I absolutely love is to do these small group Learn OmniFocus office hour sessions. And these are video conference, so everybody can see each other. They're specifically not recorded, so we can keep things confidential. And it's just a great opportunity to spend some time with some other OmniFocus users, including myself, and just talk about some things that maybe are challenging about your system and your workflow, and get some real-time feedback on that. And something I've been doing for many years, even before Learn OmniFocus was around, is private consulting. And this is something I continue to do. And you can go to learnomnifocus.com/private if you want to really take a deep dive into your system and have my guidance as you maybe make some changes and enhancements and things. So as before we get to Justin's session, I want to talk about a few of the sessions that are coming soon. And the very next one is on mastering reviews with OmniFocus 3. This is, I think, kind of an opportune time to be talking about this topic. Sometimes people kind of see the need for doing reviews, or maybe think they should be doing reviews, or whatever version of the story there is, but maybe aren't finding the time. There's a lot of hustle and bustle. So if you are in a place where you've maybe got a bit more downtime now, or you're maybe working from home or something like that, and don't have that commute to just freeing up hours, then this would be a really great time to do a review of your system, as well as get your system up to date and get into the habit around it. And this isn't only going to be about OmniFocus. It'll be really about doing reviews that cover all aspects of your life, and looking at how OmniFocus can bring some structure that can prompt you to review what needs to be reviewed, so you're not having to kind of mentally keep track of what needs to be done. So really looking forward to that one. I know Justin's going to be talking about reviews today as well, so it's going to be a perfect segue into our April 22 session. And that'll be a 90-minute session, 10 to 11:30, and there'll be some interactions in that, so you'll have the opportunity to look at your system as we go through the session, and maybe see it from a different perspective. I'm also really looking forward to welcoming Michael Kirkman-Jones to Learn OmniFocus Live. That'll be on May 27th from 10 to 11 Pacific time. I've known Mike for quite a few years now. He did one of the in-depth courses I offer, so I got to know him well through that. And he's got a lot to share. He's a very seasoned project manager and programmer. He definitely has a passion for productivity and technology. He's got some very innovative ways of using OmniFocus and naming things. And if you're into automation, I think you'll really enjoy this one as well, because he's definitely a big fan of automation. He'll be talking about some of the ways that he really uses that. There's currently 5 Learn OmniFocus office hours sessions open for registration. So there's 3 in April and 2 in May. And hopefully at least one of these days and times will work for you. If you want to come to these and you're finding that you can't find a day and time that works, definitely let me know. I'm definitely open to having more sessions and varying the timing. Okay, and without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Justin DiRose. And Justin is joining us from Bemidji, I believe it's pronounced. Hopefully I got the spelling right. I actually looked it up. It's an Ojibwe term that means a lake with crossing waters. So I thought that was really cool. It's located in northern Minnesota. And just give you a little taste of work that Justin does. He works for Discourse. And if you've used a lot of the forums out there, including the Omni Group's forum, Mac Power users, uses the same software as well as automators and many others. All of these are powered by Discourse, and I'm a big fan of Discourse. I'm actually thinking of adding a Discourse forum for Learn OmniFocus users. So if that's something you'd enjoy seeing as an addition, definitely let me know. But it's definitely the best forum software I've ever used. Justin also has an online community that I'm a regular part of. It's called Effective Remote Work. And it's really definitely very relevant today. It's about helping individuals and companies be better at remote work. So very relevant with so many people working remotely at the moment. He has a great podcast as well, one that I listen to regularly that's called Process. And you'll find that at podcast.effectiveremotework.com. And he's been featured on the Omni Group's website called Inside OmniFocus. I definitely recommend checking out that article if you haven't already. And lastly, definitely recommend checking out his blog as well. It's justindirose.com. And there's lots of great content there covering technology and productivity. All right, and without further ado, I'll pass it over to you, Justin.
Well, thanks for having me on today, Tim, to talk about my productivity setup. One thing I wanted to share before we dive in here too is I just launched a brand new ebook for free called The Ultimate Guide to an Effective Weekly Review. One of the things that I've seen come up that's been a hot topic on podcast episodes as well as in the community has been a demand for it is like how the heck do you do reviews and be effective at them? And so I've spent some time just kind of compiling the thoughts and processes and advice that I've accumulated over the years. And so if anybody's interested in taking a look at the ebook, you can head over to weeklyreviewchecklist.net and sign up to get a free copy of it as well. It's brand new, so if you have any feedback at all, definitely glad to get that from you. Just hit reply on the email that you'll get, and I'll definitely take that into consideration. I want this to be fluid and be able to expand upon it as time goes on. Make it an awesome resource for everyone who's trying to figure out how the heck you do a good review. So I will jump over to OmniFocus here, and we'll start here. Kind of the broad picture of my system is I've used OmniFocus for, since 2014 now, I think. It's been a long time. I remember hearing about it for the very first time on Mac Power users, and goodness, I think it was 2009 or something like that. It wasn't too long after they had started. And I was a college student. I couldn't afford OmniFocus at that time, but I was just like, man, this software sounds so cool. You can do so much stuff with it. And then finally, when I got to be an adult with a real job and actually have a use for it, I decided to jump in and buy it. And so I've been using it since 2014 about, and my workflow with this has looked completely different a number of different times, because if you've been in productivity or trying to be productive using task managers and productivity software for a long period of time, you know that your needs fluctuate sometimes, year to year, week to week, sometimes day to day. I don't know, for me, that's a very real reality right now, because I have 3 kids under the age of 4 at home, and I work from home. And obviously with the pandemic that's going on right now, everything is in flux. And so I found that my system needs to have a level of flexibility with that. And OmniFocus has been a fantastic tool to build that kind of flexibility into my workflow. And so looking at OmniFocus here, I want to get into a little bit of my structure and the tags and perspectives that I use. And then we'll talk a little bit about how I plan in Notion, and then also looking at the bullet journal and other softwares that I use in the process as well. OmniFocus is really the place where I store committed actions. It's not the place where I put, someday maybe items. I don't put little ancillary things in there. It's the place where if there's a project or a task that I'm committed to doing in the next 6 months, that's where it lives. If I have decided that I'm not committed to it in the next 6 months, it goes somewhere else. So the first place I want to show today is my projects structure. So you can see I've got a few folders here. I started off this year just trying to be really simple with this, where I had just maybe 3 folders, where one was projects, another was single actions. And I realized that that wasn't scaling very well. The more, projects that I actually had in here. The reason I was trying to do that, though, is because order in OmniFocus can be really powerful. And so if you have, say at the top here, this steer the ship folder, in most perspectives, you can set it to, respect that order. And so if something is at the top, that can more realistically show you that it is a higher priority item. And so I was using a broader projects folder. And so what I've done is I've broken it down by area here. So I've got this triage folder, which is where I've just got a projects that I am actively fleshing out, where I need a place to store next actions, but I haven't necessarily committed to doing them in the moment, but I'm going to be soon. There's something where I'm more planning it out, but I don't have it completely solidified yet what it needs to look like. And so those will land there where I can work on those. Then this steer the ship folder, there's 2 things that this folder serves. One is it is a for projects that are my seasonal aims. So the way I structure my broader planning is that for each year I have a word or a theme. It's very similar to what CGP Grey and Mike Hurley talk about on the Cortex podcast, where it's just kind of a guidepost on what this year should look like or what I'm expecting out of this year. This year is the year of stabilization because my wife and I had our last baby last year. And so this year we're going to navigate, the plan has been to navigate, okay, how do we stabilize our family? How do we stabilize our lives? Kind of settle things down so where you can get into a little bit more of a rhythm. And then, the coronavirus outbreak happened and that completely changed that. But from there, on the year perspective, I've got that word that's kind of guiding my decisions throughout the year. And then on a seasonal basis, and that's generally just like a 3-month period. So like January to March, April through June, but it can extend beyond that. It can be a little shorter than that. Is what I'll do is I'll pick 3 main overarching aims that I want to push forward during that season. They're kind of like goals, but they're not really. They're more just areas that I want to focus on in that time. And so I'll develop action plans for that. So what you can see here is I've got these 3 aims. I've got leveling up at Linux and Vim, my work at Discourse. I spent a lot of time on the command line. Discourse is actually quite slow to develop on Mac OS. And so I've been looking at expanding, the operating systems that I have knowledge about and getting into Linux where it tends to be more performant. So just learning a little bit more. And so these are some action items to dig into that. With the coronavirus outbreak and pandemic, it's been on my mind lately, and I'm sure it's been on a lot of other people's minds too. How do you keep your family in a state of well-being during this time? And so I've got ideas that I'm playing with and things that I want to explore doing in the next few months, like planting a garden, because I am not a gardener, but I want to learn how to be one, at least in some low-level sense of capacity. And then things like planning meals, and then also solidifying my strategy for effective remote work. So these are some of the things that on a broad basis that I want to think about, have top of mind, advance over the next few months. They're not necessarily urgent items or big projects where they require a lot of next actions. If there are any of those that come out of these, I'll usually break them out into a separate project and put them into a different folder. The other thing that this folder serves is for all of my reviews. We'll come back to what these reviews look like in a little bit, but basically I have reviews at every single different level of time. I've got a startup routine, which is kind of my daily review. It's how I get into work for the day, a weekly review, a monthly review, seasonal review, again on that kind of quarterly basis, and then an annual review. Then I've got folders for each major area of my life. I haven't broken it down into like, well, I'm a songwriter, and so I've got a songwriting folder, or I've got responsibilities at my church, so I have a church folder. I haven't gone that far just because the more granular that I make it tends to result in more decisions that I have to make, and the more decisions that I have to make, the more complication in my mind that comes when I'm like, okay, where does this one thing have to go? Well, it's kind of in this one place and it's kind of in this other place. And so I try to just back it up and keep it as general as possible. And I don't have 800 projects in OmniFocus right now. And so it works for me. But if someone, say, really gets super granular in their projects and task management, maybe something a little bit more spelled out is going to be a little bit better. I've done the whole like super deep folder structure, make it very specific, and it just has increased, complexity for me. And as David Allen says, and other people say, like, keep your productivity system simple. It doesn't need to be any simpler. It doesn't need to be any more complex. And that's really the challenge with building any kind of productivity system, is keeping it as simple and as complex as it needs to be, finding that sweet spot right in the middle. So in the discourse folder here, I've got, and this is the general setup that I have with all of my folders, is I've got some projects here at the top. These are listed in order of priority. I've scrubbed out all sensitive information in these, so but at least you can get an idea of what active work kind of looks like in mine. And one thing that's interesting about the way I'm using projects, and it's something that changed for me over the course of time, was where I would used to create a project and then just try to basically like mind dump everything that I could think of as like possibly needing to do for that project into the project as a task. But I found that I more often than not did not follow through with any of those items going forward. And so the approach that I've started to take is I'll create a project and I'll have a defined outcome. That'll be the project name. So this one is customer one migration. I'm migrating a customer from a different forum software into Discourse for, because they're coming onto our hosting. And so what I do is that sometimes the process looks very similar in the long run, but it's all very different when it gets down to the details. And sometimes I run into issues. Sometimes I run into roadblocks with it. I'll have to go back to the customer and they'll have specific feedback for me that they say, hey, I want these posts to look this certain way. And so instead of trying to plan out the whole project and have this big long checklist of things that I need to do, which those are helpful in certain situations, but in more often than not for the type of work that I'm doing on a day-to-day basis, just tracking my next actions is actually the most helpful thing for me. And that just kind of keeps the stress level low for me in my system. I have a strong idea of what my outcomes are, which are the projects listed in OmniFocus, but then I also have just the concept of what needs to happen next. And then when I check off those items, I'm very diligent every single day and every week to make sure that I'm going through my stalled projects, projects that don't have any action items associated to them, and making sure like, hey, is this project done? If it is, make sure to complete it in OmniFocus. If it's not, then I need to make sure to define a next action. And that could even be like just saying, figure out what the next action is on this thing. Because sometimes it's not always clear in the moment. Sometimes I need to do a little bit of digging to say, okay, I know this isn't done, but I don't necessarily know what needs to happen next. I've become a big fan of sequential projects inside of OmniFocus for this reason too, because there's a lot of projects where I'll maybe have like 2 or 3 action items or next actions that I know need to happen in a specific order. But say, I just don't want to see it all. And I used to use parallel projects almost exclusively, but now I think I'm using more sequential projects than not, because it cuts down on the clutter. And when I get into my custom perspectives, you'll see a little bit more on why that's helpful for me. But generally, this is how I'm structuring my my projects here in the folder structure. Each one of these folders, other than steer the ship and triage and downtime, have a single action project that just kind of lists out single actions that I keep track of. Most often than not, these are recurring tasks that I just need to make sure that I keep on top of. Like for example, in our internal discourse that we use to communicate as a team, we every week post an update in a topic that we each have of like what type of things that we did that week, and just kind of explaining how the week went, maybe some roadblocks and things that we encountered, or the different commits we made to the software, the different types of support requests that we handled, things like that. So this helps it surface, and it's just on a recurring basis. Dropping down to hobbies, this one's just kind of a unique one. I had this listed as music, but there's lots of other things that I like to do for fun and just play with. But one of those things is making music and doing some music production on my Mac and having some fun with that. There's other things too, but if there's projects that are related to that, they'll go in this hobbies folder. Kind of the outlier here though is the downtime folder. And these are literally just projects that are not important at all, but are something that I need to do. So you can see here, like one I've got here is improve my wiring under my desk. I had this really clean when I moved into my new house last fall, but as I've added more gear and changed monitors and stuff out, I've had some wiring that needs to get cleaned up, and so that's not something that's super high priority. I mean, it's definitely a downtime task, and so if there's anything that it fits into that, like okay, if I've got some downtime, I don't know what to do next, at least I have a place to go where I can look at and say, okay, here's the things I've decided I want to do here, and I can make some progress on doing them. Jumping over to tags. I keep tags pretty minimal. I started off trying not to use any tags this year at all, and I was just finding that having some level of metadata is really helpful in trying to organize, but also state like, hey, like this is what this thing is, because it's not always beneficial to put it in the actual task name. So starting at the top here, I've got a today tag, and these are the items that I am doing today. And so I'll go through this list every single day, make sure it's accurate. I'm either removing the today tag from items on here, or I am deferring them to another day. I try not to use defer dates too much in OmniFocus, because I know others like David Sparks have had issues with them when you're relying on them too much, because you're just constantly pushing tasks off. So if I have a defer date on it, it's because I know that I am not going to get to something until X day. It's not something that I'm using just because I don't want to do it today. That's why I have the today tag. And you can see I've got some flagged items here. Those just surface tasks that are more important. They're not necessarily defining that it's something I need to do today, but it's more just like hey, you should look at this one above the other ones instead. but more often than not, I'm going off of the today tag as my main focus in working through my lists during the day. Progress, this is an interesting one. These are all tasks that are kind of pushing the needle forward in different areas. So you can see most of these are from my steer the ship, higher level projects that are more goal oriented. But there are other ones in my database too, in other areas where it's something that I need to do on a recurring basis. It's something that is more, to use Stephen Covey's term, to sharpen the saw. It's more of like a self-improvement or an area I want to learn, an area I want to grow in that is a recurring type task. So I just label these progress with the little, hand pushing forward because it just made sense in my mind. It's been nice to be able to have the emojis and the tags too, because it's just a nice, quick visual indicator as to what the heck this thing is. If you also notice too, over on the projects screen, I just tried to capture a task there, whoops. If you notice here too, I have these emojis inside the project title. And I decided to do that because it made it really easy to pull those specific projects into perspectives using search. And I can show you what that looks like here in a minute when we get to perspectives. Looking at this tag here too, maintenance, these are literally just maintenance actions. So like I use You Need a Budget to help keep my family's budget on track. So every week I have a task to make sure that that's updated and then paying off the credit cards that we use on a regular basis. And that just defers off every single week on Friday or every 2 weeks actually. And this is things like replacing the furnace filter, checking the softener salt for the water softener, making sure that I get the septic pumped out every few years, feeding my sourdough starter because I bake bread at home, all sorts of things like that. This is just a list of all the maintenance tasks that I have that need to get taken care of. Agenda is just that. It's all stuff that I am needing to talk to somebody about. I don't have it split out into individual people because I generally don't have a lot of these tasks, but these are just the tasks that I need to involve somebody else in. It's usually a conversation, whether that's in person, a phone call, or an email or something like that. Some of these other ones are more just metadata. I'm not working off of these lists, but the routine tag is tasks that are routine items. They're things that need to happen on a recurring, regular basis. It just helps me keep it in a frame of mind. So while like putting out the hoses and the lawn furniture and hooking up the sprinklers in the yard is not necessarily a maintenance task, but it is something I need to do on a routine basis. And that's every spring. Just helps me kind of keep in mind like what that thing is. I've got a review tag just to keep those items separate from my various review projects. Waiting, this is pretty self-explanatory there. These are items that I'm just waiting on, and I can put them in in a perspective where I can just check on those things, make sure that I'm progressing those if I need to follow up with people. These last two are fairly new that I'm experimenting with, but one is next season. That is the next season of work or the next time frame that I am designating a season for myself. If there's something that comes up where it's like, well, I'm committed to doing this, but I can't do it at this time, I'll tag it the next season tag, and then it's something that I can follow up on in a few months. And then lastly, this one came from Wilson over on the Effective Remote Work community. And I thought this was a fantastic idea, is to create a tag for after the COVID outbreak. So there's things like I have a recall on my minivan that I have that I need to contact the dealership to get taken care of. Well, right now is probably not the best time to do that. Same thing, I've got some breakers that need some service in my house. So again, not the best time to do that with the pandemic going on. And so this just lets me keep them in my system, keeps them out of the way because it's a on hold tag, but it tells me like, okay, after all of this settles down, then I can start to look at these items again. Let's pop over to some perspectives. You can see I have my general perspectives up top here, the projects tags and forecast. I use these more for reference and for managing the structure of my OmniFocus database than working out of them day to day. I primarily use all the perspectives on the left-hand side here for accessing my tasks. So you can see the steer the ship perspective. This one literally just pulls up the reviews that I have active. So it doesn't show me the projects that are more for my seasonal aims, but this one shows me my reviews. So this is where I start every single day, is getting through my startup routine and any reviews that I have going on, because I've found over time that when I try to push a review off toward the end of the day, more than likely one of two things happens. Either A, I am not going to do the review because I forget about it and run out of time, or B, I forget about it until 30 minutes or 60 minutes before I have to be done with work for the day, and then I have a very crunched amount of time to get it done in. And so if I try to do the review more at the beginning of the day, then I'm more likely to do it and have more time to actually think and consider the items that I'm looking at in my reviews. This fire perspective, this is literally the stuff that is due, overdue, or flagged. And this just keeps the important, potentially urgent stuff on my mind. I'm not working out of this list. But it's something that I want to review every single day to make sure that I'm not missing anything important. Then these perspectives over here, you can see with the 1, 2, and 3, these are the places where I am working primarily out of the day, primarily the today perspective. And the today perspective is literally just all the tasks tagged today. And so I am going through these generally from top to bottom, trying to get through them. As you can see, I've got some reviews that are backed up here because this is a demo database. But these are the items that I'm focusing on primarily throughout my day. I try to limit this list to no more than 6, just simply because if I have more than that, it's an unrealistic expectation of myself. Ideally, this list should be no more than 3. Because 3 tasks, especially if they're bigger tasks to do or take longer periods of time, that's a much more realistic thing for myself to accomplish. And then 2, if I get through the 3 tasks in here, that frees me up to go into the next perspective, which is the progress one, which is 2 things. 1, it's that progress tag that we looked at. And 2, these are the items that are relating to my broader overarching goals for the season. One thing I should talk about here too is kind of how I frame the ideas behind like how I'm prioritizing. So I've talked about it a little bit on my podcast in the past and over on the Effective Remote Work community, but basically the way I see the building blocks of a productivity system is we often talk about them being, a task manager, reference software, and a calendar. It's like, well, those are building block tools of a productivity system, but the primary pieces and elements of a productivity system are commitments, intentions, and habits. And so one thing that I try to do with my productivity system in general is to make sure that I am keeping track of all the commitments, which is all the hard landscape items. These are appointments on my calendar. These are due tasks. These are things that I have committed to do every single week or on a specific day at a specific time. That if these don't get accomplished, then something is broken in the system. So publishing my podcast every single Friday, that's something that has to happen every single week. I don't have a specific calendar for blog posts, so those wouldn't fall under this, but sometimes I'll write one. Sometimes I'll make a YouTube video, but I'm not committing to myself to do those every single week. But the podcast is something that I have set myself to do. And so that would be a commitment. An intention is something that I have decided is important for me to focus on, but if I don't do it that week, then it's okay. The system isn't blowing up, my life isn't falling apart because I haven't done that for whatever reason. But they are the items that I have deemed important enough to at least try to spend some time advancing. And so that would be things like this progress perspective here. And then habits, obviously, are the habits and routines and things that I need to do on a daily or weekly or monthly basis that help keep everything moving. So that's a daily review, a weekly review, that's exercising, things like that. So that's kind of the general frame that I try to put around my productivity system, is managing those different types of things. And so commitments will go in OmniFocus if they're more of a task, or they'll go on my calendar if they're more of an event that needs to take place. Intentions, I'll list those out in OmniFocus. Those tend to be tasks, but I'll also put them in Notion, which we'll look at in a little bit here as well. This maintenance perspective is again, just a view for the maintenance tag. Pretty self-explanatory there. So once I've worked through these, or I've done what I want to do out of those for the day, I'll generally jump to the available work perspective. And this is why why choosing the sequential projects has been important for me, because this shows me literally all the stuff that is available for me to do now. It makes it a lot easier for me to just say, okay, I am done with work for the day, and I have got some things that I need to do in the house. Well, this one is at the top. Again, respecting that project order of the folder. If it's at the top, it's probably a higher priority for me to do because I'm intentionally ordering these things inside of OmniFocus. So I'll take a look at this and say, okay, I need to spend some time, clearing stuff off the island, or putting away the laundry, whatever it is that needs to happen in the house, or whatever project is there. Downtime. This perspective is literally just the downtime folder. I'll use this one oftentimes on mobile just to see, if I'm holding the baby asleep, if there's anything that I can do on my phone, while that's going on. And then lastly, this one here, available tags, similar to the available projects, available work perspective, is just showing all the available work, but broken down by tag. And so if I just want a quick way to look through everything on progress and maintenance, or another tag that's there, I can easily do that. This is one more that I'm experimenting with these days, but it's something that I've been finding helpful here and there, where I just want to have a different way to look at things. And that's really the beauty of OmniFocus, is that you have so many different ways to add metadata to your tasks and projects, and then so many different ways through custom perspectives to be able to break it down and look at it differently. Sometimes just that shift in perspective can bring a freshness to looking at your list, to give you the spark to say, oh yeah, I probably need to start working on this one thing if you're feeling a little bit sluggish with it, because we all do. I mean, I do that too. I don't know how many times over the last couple of weeks with the pandemic going on that I've found myself working, where I'm not really working on the most important thing, but I'm doing something to keep myself busy. And that's just the way it is. It's the reality of life right now. But that's being able to flip through different perspectives here gives me some ideas for how to more intentionally spend my time when I'm not quite sure what to do next.
One thing that relates to one of the questions that Stan had is, he's saying, assume you are using deferred due dates to pull the today tag onto. And I'd just be curious in general about what's your process for assigning the today tag?
Yeah, that's really simple, actually. It's literally a task that I'm doing today. And so I'm going through usually my available work list in the morning, sometimes my fire perspective, and just assigning the today tag. Now, some of them, if I'm like on this one here, taking out the trash, something that has to happen today, because if I don't do it today, it's not getting picked up tomorrow. And that means I have a bunch of stinky diapers that are going to be sitting in my garage. But one thing I have to do with this is I do put the today tag on this as a recurring task. So that way it surfaces to my today list every single Thursday, because it's something I have to do then. Now with, and I do the same thing too with these review tasks here. These just surface on my list today. And these are ones that I will defer if I don't have time to do them today, but I will plan some time to do them. So for example, the monthly and seasonal reviews, those will take, an hour or two, to do and actually go through and process all the information that I need to on a regular basis. So I won't always do those today when they pop up on my list, but I will plan to do them at a certain point. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. So you might
Okay.
essentially have a defer date on something that also has a today tag,
Yes.
but it only really becomes a today action when it becomes available in that case.
Correct.
If I understand correctly. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, and that's honestly the number one reason I have stuck with OmniFocus over the years. When looking at other softwares that have really cool capabilities, OmniFocus just constantly draws me back because of the defer date feature. It is hands down one of the most powerful things, because you can easily keep something out of sight when you don't need to see it using on hold tags, on hold projects, and defer dates. Which other softwares don't have. It's just you get a whole dump of everything that's in your system when you look at other tools sometimes. But OmniFocus is really powerful in that you can see what you need to see on a given day or in a given moment or given context, and then move on, from there and be able to see it in different ways too.
I think now in particular, we were talking before we started recording about how our systems need to adapt to the circumstances. So being able to add something like a COVID-19 tag that's on hold, I've been doing something similar where I've got like an appointment for the annual physical or dentist or something like that. And I don't want to be looking at that day after day and sort of kicking it down the road with the deferred date. So even being able to do stuff like that so easily, I think it really makes it shine.
Absolutely. I know one thing I forgot to dive into and come back to was my my reviews. I don't want to touch on those real quick. I won't get too deep into like the very specific tasks in them, but I'll give you a little bit of an overview of what these look like. So my startup routine daily review that I do is largely I'm collecting from inboxes and processing them and then planning my day. So generally, and what I've done in the past too with planning, and this is where the bullet journal has come in and been handy, is I've been using that as kind of my workspace. Just with the way my life is right now, and it's not as concrete with times that I'm working as it was in the past. I've tried to move all that stuff digitally for the time being because I might be working at 4 o'clock in the morning on my phone or on my laptop, again, holding the baby while he's sleeping because he won't sleep any other way right now. But I've been doing that more inside of OmniFocus or inside text files and things like that right now, just defining what my plan is for the day. That's the today tag as well, different focuses that I want to work on, things like that. But what I was doing previously with the bullet journal is, in addition to using the bullet journal as a place where I'm doing my journaling, I have tried to stick pretty closely to the Ryder Carroll version of the bullet journal and using the dots for tasks and the circles for events and the dashes for notes and things like that. Just having those quick, rapid logging symbols and techniques inside of the journal has made journaling a lot easier for me to do. Because before, I would always journal longhand and write everything out. But now that I've gotten in kind of the flow of what a bullet journal looks like, especially with the daily logs component of it, it's made journaling just a lot easier because I either throughout the day or at the end of the day, I can go back and just kind of quickly sketch out what happened, what was on my mind, and then I can journal out things a little bit more long form if they require it at the time. But previously I would have my notebook open on my desk next to me here, and I would use that to write my plan out for the day, the top 2 or 3 things that I wanted to work on. or main focuses that I wanted to have. And then also, I would use that to capture stuff as the day went on too, whether it was an idea or a task or just something that needed to be handled, so that I wasn't working inside of the OmniFocus database all day long. I know myself and then Wilson again over at the Effective Remote Work community, we've kind of used in the past OmniFocus as the database for tasks, and then paper or the bullet journal as the daily workspace. OmniFocus is super good at being structured and giving you the information that you need in a given moment in time. Where it's not great is being creative, because it's an outline. And this is where I've pulled in tools like Notion and the bullet journal as well, to try to give myself a different context to be creative in, and to try to plan and think in a bigger picture perspective. So generally I'll use Notion for the broad long-term plans, because I don't like writing those on paper, because paper is too static and long-term plans can change way more often than your paper can. And paper is really good at kind of handling the day-to-day flow of things. So jumping over to the weekly review here, I go into this a bit in the ebook that I have, The Ultimate Guide to an Effective Weekly Review. But basically, I got it split out into 4 different sections. This is where I'm doing kind of the normal system review of making sure the task manager and Notion and everything is up to date and accurate, reflecting my system. So I've got a clear the decks section here. This is where I am getting ready to do my review. I'm doing a mind sweep. I'm clearing all my inboxes out. I'm kind of gathering all the things. Then I'm doing a process where I am reviewing a trigger list. I'm going through the bullet journal over the last week, a calendar, my projects list, my main perspectives that I use, my project incubator, which is in Notion, and I'll show you guys that in a little bit. My ideation workspace inside of drafts, which is just literally a scratch pad that I have that I'm working on ideas there, because it's really easy for me to jump into that on my iPhone and scratch out ideas, things that I'm working on. I've used that a lot for solidifying the strategy for effective remote work, different items, and trying to pull those all together and then process them, making sure that they're clarified appropriately, that I know what they are, and then I'm putting them in the right place. Then this is kind of where I deviate from a lot of the standard review process. I know a lot of people will end their review kind of at that point, and that's totally fine. For me, what I like to do is spend some time journaling and reflecting on the last week. And so these items here are questions that I'm writing answers to in my journal every week. So did I meet my commitments? And this, if I did, that's great. If I didn't, then there's usually a sign that I've taken on too much high priority work, and I need to start either dumping some of that off if I can, or I need to, evaluate if something else needs to give in my life somewhere so I can make room for that. Did I accomplish my intentions? Did I make some progress on the areas that I have said were important for me to do? And if not, why did that happen? Taking a look at my habits. Did I have more than one day in between doing a habit? And if so, why was that the case? Did I focus on the most important things? Now, for me, this is not my most important tasks that we talk about a lot of times in productivity. This is the most important things in my life, which is my spiritual life, my wife and my family, and those most important relationships to me. If I'm reflecting on that and I'm saying, yeah, I didn't really do a very good job of that, then I need to put pause on everything else and figure out why that's the case. Because if I'm not spending the appropriate amount of time investing in those areas, then everything else eventually is going to fall off the wheels. There's nothing more important than my wife and my family, and investing time in those areas. And as a result of that, I want to make sure that I'm reflecting on that every single week to make sure that I'm loving them well and doing all of that. What did I do to stay challenged? That's something that, if there's sometimes, some weeks where I'm just wrestling with, man, I need something to, not be so bored. And so what I'll do there is just reflect, like, did I find something for myself to challenge myself this week? I need to keep myself challenged because that's how I stay engaged with work and with life. And then is there anything that I want to try next week? I'm a big fan of experiments when it comes to productivity. I'm never a fan of like just all of a sudden dumping one thing to jump into something else. But I do like saying, well, I think Rome research is kind of interesting. Some friends have been convincing me that this might be kind of cool to try. So maybe I'll try it. And so that's one thing I've been doing this week, is just kind of messing around with that and seeing like, could this fit in my workflow somewhere? Does this make sense for me to use? Or is just this kind of like a fad thing that is, pretty interesting, but it doesn't add any value to my system. So I'll try to pick like maybe one thing over the next week, each week, where I am trying to experiment with something. Or if I'm satisfied with my system or I don't have time to do that, then I'll just skip that too. And then lastly, in the weekly review, I'll do some preparation. So that's where I'm reviewing my broader picture goals and yearly theme. And I want to decide on 3 outcomes and intentions for the week. And then I'll set up some planning in Notion. Then monthly, and you can see probably a trend here with some of these reviews, is that each broader time scale kind of goes up a level. And so the daily stuff is focused on all of the little bits of information that are coming at me on a daily basis. The weekly is kind of, okay, how did this week go? Am I on track with the things there? The monthly review is more focused on broader picture stuff than that. So this is making sure that I'm, on track with my my goals that I have for the season, and are they still relevant? And are there themes in my journal that came up? I'm creating a habit tracking spread in my bullet journal, making sure that's up to date. Then just making sure that the broader pictures of my system and my life are lining up. And that's same true with the seasonal review. I'm looking back at the last season and seeing, did I meet my aims, or do I need to continue them? Am I going in the right direction with that? Or did something change in my life that I have to change directions here as well? Is there anything that went well and didn't go well? And basically I'm looking for things that I can learn from. And then at this point too, I'm looking at broader picture, are my tools still lining up? What in my system fell apart or what went well, so that I can start to make broader adjustments. And then I'm looking at the next season and saying, okay, what do I need to focus on during this time? And then lastly, the annual review. This is one I've been doing for the last couple of years, and it was inspired largely by Mike Schmitz's personal retreat course. It's a fantastic resource if you're doing any kind of longer term planning or bigger picture overviews of what your life looks like on either, can be a quarterly or even annual basis. But I'm looking at things like, where did my money go? Because if my money is going in specific places, that shows something that I have value for. And is that something that lines up with the values that I actually have? And so I'm looking at standout areas there. Then I'm looking at the wheel of life, and filling that out and rating myself and reflecting on, okay, what was great about this? What was not so great about this area? Because that gives me some usually some pretty important target areas for the next year. I'm looking at a retrospective and, again, trying to reflect on the last year, what went well and what didn't. Then I like to spend some time just dreaming. What could this next year look like? What kind of projects might I want to take on? What kind of things do I want to do? This is actually where Process, the podcast, the idea came out of that in a session like this, where I was just like, I've wanted to start a podcast for the last 10 years. Really, that was the case. I had wanted to do one for 10 years, but nothing was lining up with it. And finally, I kind of came to the point, I was like, this is a perfect time to start one. And so I did. And I'm setting my word or theme for the year. I am looking, reviewing my business and personal systems, making sure that I'm planning for any potential equipment purchases and stuff. And then I'm completing a seasonal review. So Mark, I see you're wondering how long reviews take. They do seem pretty detailed. In the broad picture of things, I can get an annual review done generally within 2 to 3 hours. And that's happening once a year. A seasonal review probably takes me about an hour, but it's something that I'm thinking about throughout the course of a couple of weeks generally too. Like, I just kind of switched seasons in my system, to this next one. And I've been thinking for the last couple of weeks, okay, what do my main focuses need to be in the next season? But a lot of it is largely just asking myself questions. And a lot of times, on the weekly, monthly, and seasonal reviews that I'm asking myself questions, answering those in my journal, I'm not putting down any more than maybe 3 or 4 sentences for each of them. If less than that, sometimes it's just a couple words. And so when I'm just doing those, it's not taking me very long at all. A weekly review will maybe take me 45 minutes total. And that's if I haven't really spent a lot of time in the middle of the week, or if I've got a lot of stuff in my mind that I need to get out and try to figure out where it goes. So I try to be pretty flexible with a lot of these. I'm not just sitting down, especially in the longer reviews, longer time scale reviews, for much longer than about 30 minutes at a time. It just depends. But so it's not too crazy as far as time commitment goes. They do get a little bit higher in time commitment for the broader time scale reviews, but that's really about it.
Just one follow-up question on that as well. Do you tend to do each of these reviews within like one day, or for something like an annual review, would you do it over the course of a few days or a week or something like that?
Honestly, that depends on the time and place. Like for the annual review this last year, we had a newborn in the house, so I was doing that, split up. I tried to do a big chunk of it in a couple-hour session, but I was working on bits and pieces of that throughout the course of a couple weeks. A weekly review I'll do in one sitting. A monthly review, I might chunk out different sections of it. Like, for example, I'll do the finances piece of it in one sitting, and I might scan all my papers and do that in another sitting, and then I'll do the rest of it in another sitting. Because generally, like when I'm flipping through my bullet journal, I'm not like trying to deeply analyze anything. I'm just trying to get a broad overview of like what happened in the last month. Is there anything that stands out to me? Same thing looking in Notion. I'm not doing a super deep dive into every little thing that's in there, but I am looking for things that, trigger like, and let's just jump over to Notion now. So like, I'll show you my project incubator. This is where I put ideas. I saw that was one of the questions in chat here, is that if I have an idea, if I have something that's interesting to me that I might look at in the future, I'll put it in this little database that I have inside of Notion here. And so you can see I've got different areas. But one thing I'm doing in a review context here and looking at these is I'm looking at each one of these. I'm literally spending maybe 5 seconds or 10 seconds on each one. Say, okay, is there something that triggers in my mind that's information or interesting that needs to go in there? Or, even just like, is that even of interest to me anymore? And if not, well, then I'll just drop it. And if it is, and something like that really kind of jives with where I'm at right now, then I'll, mark it as want to explore or committed if it's something that I'm going to do. Those are just signifiers for me to look, when I look back at that list, say kind of what the stage of idea development it is. And sometimes too, when I'm, working on a song, I'll just open up a project in OmniFocus with, a single next action in it. I see that was one of the questions there too, from Mark. And yeah, I mean, I'll do that. I won't necessarily put everything inside of the project incubator. If it's something that I just kind of want to plot along with over a period of time, I will create a project in OmniFocus to do that there. But the project incubator is more for ideas that I'm not for certain committed to, but it is something that is interesting enough to me to actually capture and write down and try to process some thoughts out with it.
How about for someday maybe items? Would those end up in Notion as well, or do some of those live in OmniFocus, or where would those?
Yeah, honestly, someday maybe items tend to live at more of the project level than an action item, and so those will go inside the project incubator here.
Okay.
Yep.
And then I guess maybe in triage if they're kind of moving more into that someday.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's where, the system for me is pretty flexible. I don't have a dedicated process to, okay, how do I take an idea from a concept like this and develop into a full-fleshed one. What a lot of times I'll do is I'll start jotting down ideas inside of drafts because that's what's easiest for me in the moment. Or if it's something that needs to be a little bit more structured, such as, course outline or whatnot, I'll open up a MindNode document because that works really well with the way my brain works for developing more structured information. That's actually how I do all of my podcast episodes. Is they're not outlines, they're all MindNode documents, because for whatever reason, when I'm doing a podcast, looking at the outline inside of Notion just it's much more fluid, or not Notion, but MindNode is much more fluid for me to dig into it there and get kind of in the flow of it. And then in other times for developing those ideas, I'll put a project inside OmniFocus in the triage folder. It's pretty flexible. It's not something that I'm super rigid on, and that's something I think is important for me anyway when I'm trying to be more creative, is that if I try to force it too much into a box, then I'm more worried about the rules and the box and the structures that I'm developing than I am about getting the most creative ideas out that I can in developing something like that.
And I think, as you said earlier, in so many words, some apps lend themselves to more creative work, something like MindNode, versus some are more about structure, such as OmniFocus. And I think there's a strong need for both of those. And it's really just knowing what app to use in what situation. A great one, I think a nice segue into the question that Adam just asked, is he talks about this notion of app fatigue, having a lot of apps and even deciding which one to use and what it's for. And I see a lot of people get it creates kind of a stressful state because they've got their 12 note-taking apps and they've got Notion and a bunch of other ones. And it's kind of like, at what point do you draw the line between, having too many apps and not having enough?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And honestly, it's something I think a lot of people, myself included, deal with, because there's so many cool apps and tools out there. I think one thing that's helped me in the last few years with that, because I still deal with this with note-taking tools, because I haven't found that one that really makes sense for me yet. Where it just makes sense to put information in there and I can get it in the right place and display it in the right way that I want it. And so I tend to jump around a lot with note-taking tools. And you're right. I mean, there can be a lot of fatigue with that. I think the tip that I've been trying to give myself anyway over the last couple of years has been be honest with yourself as to what's working. And like, for example, I've tried different task management tools, things, Todoist, and I've always come back to OmniFocus, because when I'm honest with myself, OmniFocus is the one that makes the most sense for me. And that's kind of why I jumped into Notion too. When I started playing with it last year, it just started making sense. I don't do everything in Notion like some people do. I largely focus on planning. And if you can see here, I'll just show you my planner real quick. I have a video on YouTube where I kind of go through my planning process, so we don't have to dive too deep into it here if you want to check out more there. But I have a page set up for a season, and then I'm literally just, noting out the date ranges here, the outcomes that I have focused on for that season, which I don't have filled out in this demo one here at this point, my year theme. And then I'm listing out my commitments and intentions for the week. It's nothing crazy. It's nothing that I'm doing, I'm spending a lot of time on, but it's just having the space where I can flexibly move some of these things around and structure it in a way that makes sense to my brain. And then have a place where I can manually enter the data in an easy format just to keep it top of mind. It's the manually entering the planning information in here and making sure that, okay, I've got a team call on Tuesday, I've got a team call today, and let's learn an OmniFocus live session, and I've got a podcast that I need to do on Friday. And then I've got these two things over here that I'm trying to keep top of mind to be intentional on. Just listing those down gives me a really easy place or easy way to keep those top of mind. But again, like back to the app fatigue deal, Reinhard mentioned in chat that the major problem is being able to link between the apps. And you know what? I've given up on that. I mean, there's some cool things that you can do. Like Hook is a cool app that you can link between stuff, and there's URL schemes, but you've got competing ecosystems here as well. You've got web apps, you've got native applications, and not all web apps can talk with URL schemes, and not all native applications handle links to web apps very well. And the way I see it in my system right now is I've got OmniFocus, I have Notion, I have MindNode, I have Drafts, and then I have, whatever flavor of the week note-taking tool I'm using, being honest there. But I mean, really, that's 5 applications that I'm using. And then I have other places where information just starts to accumulate, like my email inbox or the discourse communities that I am a part of, Twitter, my instant messages. And I just have to be intentional to check those places and see like if there's anything that sparks an action out of them and bring it into the system that I have.
And just to add to that, if you're using something like Notion, everything on Notion has its own web address. So if your task in OmniFocus is to review your 2020 S2 planning, then you can very easily put that into the notes field. And you could do that in a bit more flexible way in some ways with Hook, and that's one we'll be talking about. But even at a very basic level, just capturing that URL it essentially creates a very easy and pretty much indestructible link between those apps.
Yes, very true.
Still getting a few ones coming in asking which calendar app you use. I'd be curious to hear that as well.
Yeah, again, I keep it pretty simple. On my Mac, I use calendars, the calendar app built in. On my iPhone, I've used Fantastical for a long time. I don't subscribe to that because I don't find enough value out of it to pay $50 a year or whatever the cost is. I don't use it that much, but I did purchase Fantastical too, so I do use the base features on there. I just like the natural language processing, but if I didn't use that, I would probably just stick with the calendar application. I don't have a bunch of I have to keep track of 8-10 meetings in a day on my calendar like I did back when I worked in the corporate world, because my company, the company I work for, does not do a lot of meetings. I only have a couple a week that I have to keep track of, and so I don't live in my calendar like a lot of people do.
Yeah, I think that's an important consideration when choosing tools, is how much power and flexibility do you need. And I remember my electrical engineering professor saying that people were using a microprocessor when all they need is a transistor. So I'd say have something that can scale, because as we've talked about today, life does change sometimes unexpectedly, but not something that's really overkill for your needs.
Yeah, and the way I like to think about it too is develop the mindsets and the habits that build an effective productivity system. Don't be too reliant on the tools, because if you do have to switch a tool out, it's not as impactful if you're primarily focused on developing good review habits and developing good capture habits and stuff like that. If you have to switch between OmniFocus to Todoist or something like that, I'm sure there's going to be a period of time where you have to unlearn your OmniFocus habits and learn the Todoist habits. But the general principles of how do I construct a productivity system around a tool, they'll stay relatively the same.
First of all, how do I create checklists? If there's a set of rituals I do each morning when I first get up, another set I do as soon as I start work. It looks like you have that kind of built into one project.
Yes.
Custom, but,
Yeah, I've got largely this startup routine, and the way I went into this in the Inside OmniFocus article that I did on startup and shutdown routines. But largely, I just have a project that is completed with the last action. I have it repeating every single day of the week, Monday through Friday, and then it repeats from the completion of it. So that way, I'll go through and check off every single one of these items, and these subtasks here. Oh, I didn't do that with that one apparently, but have this complete with last action. So when I complete all of these here, these automatically complete, and then it just moves on to the next day to be available. So I just structure that just with what I found to be important.
Yep. And I think a key thing here as well is not everything needs to be as a part of a recurring project. Sometimes there's going to be those sort of standalone repeating actions that you could technically put into a project. But I see people with projects that have got 40, 50 things in there, and they feel bad because they only do 30 of them. And it needs to be kind of grounded in reality. What, even on the days where you're feeling a little having trouble getting going, what is kind of a reasonable bar to reach even on those days?
Yeah, absolutely.
And the other is relation to due dates. I think I know the answer to this, but when would you use a due date and when would you not? I guess is a
Yeah, it's the standard. I never use due dates unless something's truly due. I don't try to schedule items inside of OmniFocus using due dates or anything like that, because when I have too many due dates, and this is one of the troubles that I've had with other task management softwares, is that due dates and scheduled dates are often conflated. They're one and the same, and it makes it difficult to delineate what's actually due and important this day and what's just something that I'm saying I want to work on today. And that's why I use the today tag primarily, is to say, this is something I want to work on today. Due dates like taking out the trash, it needs to happen in the evening every Thursday night, because trash gets picked up super early in the morning on Friday. That's something that's due because it needs to happen every single week. But other than that, I very rarely use due dates.
I think due dates are often used as a bit of a safety net because people are worried about losing things in their system and not seeing at the appropriate time. And this really points to what Justin has spent quite a bit of time talking about today, is the importance of reviews. If you're using your system, if you've got the perspective set up and you're reviewing it regularly, then you'll probably be fine. You don't need those reminders, those due dates. And I think it is useful to say, if I haven't done this by 4 p.m., I want that badge to light up on my phone, or a notification to pop in. But that, I think, should be more the exception than the rule, and just get into the habit of kind of being ahead of the curve and just having those ones that are truly due as safety nets.
Yeah, and if there's there's a couple different ways in your system that you can surface tasks too that you need to have eyes on. One is you can use flags and have a perspective, or look at the flagged perspective and see what's on there. And then additionally, you can use the built-in notifications in OmniFocus, where you don't have to put a due date on something in particular, but you can remind yourself at a particular day and time of a task using that. So that's a helpful feature. Sometimes I think I've run into a couple of issues with that. Maybe it's just I don't use it too often, but I know, like on a recurring item where it's like, oh, I just want a notification 20 minutes before I want to do this one thing. I've had some issues with that not properly recurring on the notification. It's been more one time for me, but again, I don't know. Tim, you would probably know if that's something that I'm just not doing right, but
I actually rarely use the notification feature in OmniFocus. If I really want to be notified at a specific time, I'll just use the reminders and say, yo, Siri, please remind me to, review the material at 11:45 or something in preparation. If I'm concerned that I need that little cue, then I won't even put it into OmniFocus and spend the time, putting a tag and putting it into the project and so forth. I'll just quickly, add something as almost like a little alarm or something like that. One thing we didn't talk about today is the iPhone and iPad. Maybe as we wrap up, it'd be great to just get a sense of where that fits into.
Yeah, I'll pop over to that real quick. So this is just my OmniFocus home screen on iPad. One thing I didn't talk about, or on iPhone, I don't really use the iPad too much. It's more of kind of like a every once in a while device for me. I have like an old 2018 iPad. Eventually that might change, but it's been one device that I've struggled with trying to figure out, like, where does this exactly fit in my workflow? Because I have difficulty using. If I don't use something consistently every single day, then I'm not going to just like pick it up and use it generally. So the phone definitely is something that I use very consistently. One thing that's different here is this weekend perspective. And basically what that is stuff that's in my personal folder, and it's stuff in my downtime and hobbies folder. So it's just stuff, it's all my non-work related tasks that it just give me a quick place to look at them without seeing all the other stuff. But yeah, I look at my fire perspective. Then my follow-up perspective is all the stuff that I'm waiting on. And then available work is primarily where I live in here. I don't do too much. Other than that, I'll give you a sense of what my home screen looks like. I don't have a web browser on my phone generally, so I'm not out browsing the web on here. I don't do social media or Twitter or anything like that. I try to keep my phone more as much of a utility as possible, versus an access point to everything in the world. I do have podcast app, and clearly I have, drafts in MindNode, OmniFocus in my doc and messages. But yeah, I just try to use this as a way to get into places in my productivity system and keep track of ideas, because it's a really great place to develop ideas and think through things on the go, especially. But the last thing I want to use my phone for is getting tripped up and caught in cycles of things. Now, granted, I've had a web browser on my phone in recent weeks just because it's made more sense for me to have one, because I've been doing work in the middle of the night on my phone, again, holding a baby, but it's just the season. But generally I try to avoid having that, because I know it's way too much of a distraction for me to have that available all hours of the day on this little tiny device that I carry in my pocket with me everywhere.
Well, thank you so much, Justin, for being a guest today. And I definitely am walking away with some valuable ideas and insights, and I hope everyone else is as well. And hope to see you at one of the upcoming sessions. If you're kind of curious about reviews, definitely I've got some great material that I can feature in the April 22nd section as well, adding to what I've got already. Definitely check out Justin's ebook and podcast and websites and so forth. And I hope to see you all again soon. Take care.